you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome to Visiting the Village. I'm Paul Kilduff-Taylor, and joining me as ever is the aristocratic Ian Hardingham.
Hello! After spending all weekend at the PC Gamer Weekend talking to you, talking with you, talking next to you, talking on a stage near you, here I am on Monday talking to you again. I'm a glutton for punishment.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's the top story.
All-terrain driving game Spintires was briefly removed from sale after an alleged time bomb planted by the developer caused the game to stop working. Relations between developer Pavel Zagrelbanich, and I hope I've done that name justice, and publisher Ovany have been somewhat strained, leading to some to believe this is a deliberate act of sabotage on the part of Pavel. In a statement to Gamasutra, the developer has said that this was a bug with the anti-piracy code and that Ovi has access to the source code. Ian Hardingham, what do you make of this, and have you ever been tempted to time bomb your code?
This is interesting. Well, I haven't ever really had a publisher, so apart from to annoy you, I haven't had any desire to use a time bomb in my code. When we first added this story to our list of stories, it kind of looked like this was definitely what would happen, and now it looks a little bit less sure that Mr. Pavel is actually sabotaging this relationship with his publisher. But, you know, this is quite a big game. Spintires, sort of oddly popular. A game about driving big trucks across wet landscape. Apparently very popular. And he doesn't like his publisher very much. And would he go as far as to start sabotaging his own game? It's something that people talk about a lot, but it seems to me like something that's so damaging to everything that most people stop short of actually doing it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that. Normally when people sabotage something, they do it so that they can say, look at this, look, I've caused this huge damage, haha, you're stupid. And this seems to be a bit kind of like self-defeating as well. So it seems pretty unlikely. I mean, nothing is impossible in this strange world in which we live. But doing this to this extent seems unlikely to me.
Yeah, I guess we'll see how it goes on. I mean, developers really do have that power. In the end, publishers are not going to have the ability, whether they have access to the source code or not, to find out exactly what's going on in good time. It's a very expensive thing to try and track down what happened when someone tries to sabotage a big code base, as they found out on Jurassic Park. It can be just very difficult to do. So we wish them well. I hope they get on better, these guys. I hope they have a nice meeting and they make friends, because I, like everyone else, want to spin tires too.
Excellent Jurassic Park reference. Founder of Epic Games, Tim Sweeney, has come out strongly against Microsoft's new Universal Windows Platform Application Framework. In a highly critical editorial for The Guardian, he makes the case that Microsoft is trying to lock down and control app sales and distribution on Windows. Will Tim Sweeney get his HoloLens dev kit now?
I don't know. I think they might delay it a bit. Wow. Capital W wow to this. There are two stories here, really. There's a story that's about whether this UWP, Microsoft's new attempt to make, well, basically kind of an engine framework. That's one of the stories. And the second is the fact that a high up at Epic is happy to do this, to really go after Microsoft in probably pretty much the most public way he could. This is a really big deal. I think it's fair to say that I'm kind of fed up of Microsoft trying to create, let's call them frameworks. And then when they have success creating frameworks and making them popular, it tends to be a time when they start leveraging that control to make you more likely to use the platforms they want you to use. And, you know, not saying that's necessarily in their mind at this moment, but there's such a history of Microsoft doing that I think everyone should be wary of this thing. And for that reason, above all else, I just wouldn't expect it to take off. So while I have a lot of respect for Mr. Tim Sweeney for coming out and saying this, I'm really, really glad that he did. I'm not that worried about it, because I'd be really surprised if kind of a broad platform application framework that's for Windows, supposedly iOS, Xbox One, I would be surprised if this ever took off.
Yeah, I mean, we need to go back to Windows 8. I guess it's not exactly the same thing, but the whole furore around Windows 8. And I was always on the side of, it's so bad for the ecosystem that it just won't happen. And similarly, again, it's interesting that they have the strategy of trying to, make the PC into a more locked down platform. And it's just something that kind of resurfaces every now and again. Microsoft, I feel, has changed their attitude towards developers sort of subtly over time, particularly in games, to where they've got to a much better place now. But then to come out with something like this, I think it is good that a developer is showing, just how the general reaction to this kind of move is. He's done it in this very vociferous way, maybe burned some bridges, which is always the thing you worry about when you're commenting on what a big platform holder is doing. But actually here, it really needed someone to say, look, if you keep doing this stuff, it's just going to be bad for everyone. It's going to be bad for you, and it's going to be bad particularly for game developers.
Yeah, I'm sure this comes from a huge amount of frustration on Epic's part. I would be hugely surprised if they hadn't spent a lot of time before coming out with this editorial, using back channels or indeed front channels with Microsoft, talking to them about how this isn't the way that Microsoft can help developers. Epic, as a lot of people know, were actually responsible for the Xbox 360 having as much RAM as it did. Microsoft came to them and said, would you rather have more RAM, or I think it was everyone has a hard drive. If you remember, the 360 launched and one of the 360 models didn't have a hard drive.
Yeah.
And Epic said, this is much more important to have half a gig of RAM or whatever it was than to everyone have a hard drive. And apparently that decision cost Microsoft $500 million or something, or even $500 billion in basic costs or something. Anyway, it's a good story, but these guys are very close. And obviously Microsoft do have a great relationship with Epic and talk to Epic about a lot of things. So to have got to this stage, Tim Sweeney must be very frustrated with what's going on. I presume that they feel that they are important enough to Microsoft that even doing this will not, Microsoft, they don't think Microsoft has the balls or whatever to actually cut them off. Which I can probably believe. Gears of War is going to be very important to Xbox One. I think with the current state of Xbox One, Microsoft would be pretty averse to taking a big risk like just jettisoning Epic for this. On the other hand, this was really, really, really negative press.
Yeah, it's the extent to which this has gone out there. I mean, this is really the nuclear option of your relationship with another company, is to go public and say what they're doing is wrong and it's terrible and I can't stop them. That's the final option that you have. And I always wonder when people take that, if they really have exhausted all the other options. But as you say, this is a senior guy who's managed to exert a lot of influence in the past, and they've had a very close relationship. So maybe that is the case. Like, he's just got to the point where nobody will listen to him about this at all.
Yeah, I was listening to this and I was reminded of the time when there were the rumors that Microsoft might be trying to buy Unity.
Yes.
And I'm not sure I can think of anything that would cause a bigger impact in the games community, certainly in the games community that I'm part of, than that happening. That would be such a strong thing. You do not want any platform holder controlling Unity. And a lot of this stuff with Universal Windows Platform, it's about trying to leverage some of the things that makes Unity very popular. Of course, you would like to be able to publish one code base onto all of these different platforms. That's very exciting. But, I was significantly more worried about Windows 8 than you were. I thought that they tried extremely hard. I think they basically tried as hard as they could to make that happen. And it's extremely good that it didn't happen. This is not as strong a thing that they are going to be putting everything behind. They're not putting all of their eggs into this basket. So it's not, again, not too scary to me, because I just don't think it's going to really go anywhere. But yeah, sometimes every so often Microsoft does something that makes me a little bit scared.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of this I think is more understandable than the Windows 8 thing, because the Windows 8 thing really didn't benefit anyone other than Microsoft, whereas this is more of something which is kind of, as you say, geared around that ideal of a single code base across multiple platforms. So it at least has that philosophy behind it, and that's why I think that's in keeping with, as I said, this subtle change in how they relate to developers, a less antagonistic relationship. But hopefully, maybe that will now include being able to listen to very strong, I suppose, community feedback of this kind and respond to it effectively. I would hope that would be the case.
Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff going on at the moment. They're really trying once again to make Xbox for Windows a deal. And as usual, it's a bit unclear what their actual goals with that are, because they don't want to hurt the Xbox One. There's been a massive backlash against this recent Xbox game. I think it was Quantum something or other. When people found out it was going to launch later on the PC, people were very upset because they wanted it to be an actual Xbox exclusive. So it's just a murky swamp what Microsoft are doing with the PC. They feel like they have ownership over it. Obviously, they have ownership over Windows, but the recent history of all of their moves to try and shall we say improve PC gaming haven't really done anything.
How should reviewers approach early access and beta games? PC Gamer published a response last week to claims that they were too critical of the bugs and glitches in the upcoming Hitman. What sort of minimum standard should players and critics expect of a paid-for game?
Yeah, here's this topic again, but I don't want to stop talking about this topic because it's still really, really important. So, in terms of a minimum standard, your direct question, that there is no such thing as a minimum standard for me with early access. I think early access, as this article says, embraces a huge number of different approaches, from the very earliest prototype to basically finished game being sent out as a reward to someone for pre-ordering, or to do some final bug checking. As far as I'm concerned, anything can go, and that's totally cool. But what this article says, quite rightly, they're taking to task a lot of people who just shout, "But it's a beta," whenever anyone criticises anything about it. Now, I've released betas in my time. It's very upsetting when you get some feedback, some negative feedback from a journalist that you think is too early, that you think they should know you're going to fix, but they don't know you're going to fix it. And that's just a bit of the bad stuff that comes with all of the huge good stuff that comes from being able to use early access. So, if you're a huge fan of our games and you think a journalist is being unfair, when it comes to that kind of thing, if it's about them mentioning bugs too much, best not to criticise the journalist for that, because that's actually good feedback for us as well.
Yeah, I think, this is still something that's difficult because of people's problems with categorization. You've seen a lot of betas that are basically a finished game, things like Blizzard stuff. It all works, but they're just there to kind of allow them to balance things. So it's actually quite a good experience to play. There might be some server issues, and that's in the category of excusable things for that. But if you had, game-breaking, crashing stuff all the time, then people would get really angry because that's not what they expect from a Blizzard beta. But you're right, developers should be allowed to release something in whatever state they want, as long as it's clear what the state of that is. I mean, there's different things about charging for it. I played the Hitman beta on my PS4, which I got free with PS Plus. I wouldn't have paid for it. So my relationship with it was kind of predicated on that. It's like, oh, hey, I got this as an extra freebie for being in PS Plus. That's really cool. And I played it a bit, and it was a bit buggy, but I had a good time with it. So I feel like people just need to have understanding that things are going to be in subtly different categories all the time.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's specifically, PC Gamer are defending themselves here, and they're saying, well, it's all very well saying this is a beta, but this is supposedly 2 weeks away from release. And the journalists at PC Gamer know well enough the kind of things that get fixed in 2 weeks and the kind of things that don't. So I think connecting with their sort of early impressions based on that is fair enough. Like, if they're saying this is too buggy, they don't mean there are a couple of bugs. They mean this is more buggy than I would expect for something at this time. So,
right.
But yeah, just as I think developers should be allowed to release any kind of early access thing, I think journalists should be allowed to connect with it honestly in any way that they want to. I think journalists who spend more time thinking about it and who might be approaching it in a better way may have some good guidelines for themselves. But the good comes with the bad. You might get a really, really definitely unfair early access review from someone, but you just have to cope with that because you're putting your work out before it's finished. You're going to get a different set of opinions, and learning how to filter all of the feedback you get in early access is a massively important skill. And pretty much everything that a journalist says is important to you, even if it feels unfair on the surface. You can be like, oh, well, we're going to fix that. But that's not actually taking as much value as you can from someone writing an article on your game while you've still got time to sort these issues out.
Yeah, absolutely. And people need to not shout at journalists for doing that because it is, as you say, incredibly useful. Last week, Eurogamer published a rundown of their top 10 Zelda games. Have there ever been more than 10 Zelda games?
Yeah, I think there are more than 10 Zelda games. I don't know how many there are, but there are quite a lot. None of the things in this list are the old CDI ones. I'm actually going to read you this list from 10 to 1. So are you ready for that?
I don't think so.
At number 10 is A Link Between Worlds, which is the most recent Nintendo 3DS one, which is this kind of sort of slightly bizarre remix of Link to the Past. And I'm a huge Link to the Past fan. I really had a lot of subjective problems with this, but people seem to love it, so that's good. Number 9 is Spirit Tracks, which is a random DS one that was basically the follow-up to Phantom Hourglass, which has these kind of slightly freeform, open-worldy outside bits. Phantom Hourglass is at number 8. These are these DS games. Number 7 is Skyward Sword, which is the big Zelda I haven't played. Have you played Skyward Sword?
No.
Yeah, this is the Wii one. This is the second Wii one, rather. I think Robin in The Office is a big fan of this, and it really embraced the Wiimote in the most fundamental way, so I need to give that a go. And number 6 is Twilight Princess, which is the first Wii one, which I really actually quite liked. Number 5, a bit of an upset having this low, is Majora's Mask. A lot of people think that's the best. Wind Waker at 4, Link's Awakening at 3. Link's Awakening is the Game Boy one, which is like, might even be my favourite. I absolutely love that. Link to Past second, and of course, everyone's favourite video game of all time, Ocarina of Time, is at number 1. What do you think about that?
Well, it just makes me think that I wish I liked Zelda. Zelda is the thing I've tried to make myself like several times. I mean, I agree, I enjoyed playing Majora's Mask with you when we attempted to play through that. I just wish I liked it. I see people having a huge amount of affection for these games. I see some of the more interesting stuff. The combat in Skyward Sword looks pretty amazing with its Wiimote controls. There's a lot of things that I want to like about this, the openness of the structure and so on. We had that interesting topic the other week about the kind of randomized original Zelda, but it's always been from a place of appreciation for me, and not something that I can actually get into. I something about it just causes me to shut down. It might be the difficulty of the early ones, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the SNES one, Link to the Past, and the Game Boy one, Link's Awakening, are sort of 2 of my favourite games of all time, and they're by far the top of my Zelda canon. I respect and like Ocarina of Time and several other ones, but they're just sort of games that I've quite enjoyed. Whereas those 2D ones, really, they came at the right time for me. In terms of exploring this massive world, felt really exciting. They had puzzles, but puzzles that sort of felt in keeping with the world. And just the whole thing of like being blocked off from exploration until you got these new items, working out when you got a new item where in the map unlocked. So exciting. And for me, it's just, with all this 3D stuff, it just doesn't make sense for me anymore. So they sort of passed me by, and the newer 2D ones they did were usually done by different teams, and you could always tell. And also, I'm just curmudgeonly and just have nostalgia for what they used to look like. If I was going to like a modern one, it would be this new one, this A Link Between Worlds, and I did give that a go, but it was just kind of alienated me very slightly. But Zelda, it's here to stay.
It really is, and I still feel like this is a whole area of gaming that I can't tap into, and I don't particularly understand why people like. I think it was my parents' fault for not getting me a NES when I was 7.
Blame your parents for everything.
Vivendi are attempting to gain a controlling stake in Ubisoft by any means. The company is looking for financial assistance from their shareholders, along with the Canadian and Quebecois government, in order to avoid a hostile takeover. Should this be a concern for Ubisoft, given Vivendi's history with Activision Blizzard?
I mean, I don't know. Like, Vivendi, or people always said that they think Vivendi's a bit of a dodge company. They obviously are very excited about taking over control of Ubisoft. I want to know what in those meetings, what makes them so excited about that. Are they just happy about Ubisoft's profitability? Is there some other thing that they want to get into via the medium of Ubisoft? It was relatively recently, according to this article, that they had a huge share of Activision Blizzard, which I had forgotten. Apparently 61%, which is a lot of Activision Blizzard to own. So, maybe this feels a bit like a downgrade in some ways.
Right, it's an interesting one. Vivendi just seems to be kind of orbiting around the games industry, sort of trying to get back in some ways. I mean, Ubisoft's got to look like an exciting acquisition target. I don't really know about their finances that much, but just if we presume that their finances are good in terms of their position in the industry. If you want to get into the industry via acquiring a AAA publisher and developer, that's a really good company to do that with. So I completely understand why they would want to do this. Should they be worried about it? Well, any high-level takeover is going to be worrying in terms of your company culture and your means of doing things and so on. The Activision Blizzard situation has only seemed to be great for them since Vivendi left. So if you put all of those things together, I guess they should be concerned about it.
Yeah, I don't know. If you're a big Ubisoft fan, I don't really know what that looks like. If you're like a big, I guess, Assassin's Creed fan or something, how do you feel about what Ubisoft's been doing recently? I suppose people are big fans of Far Cry. Like, I think most people would say that they're doing something good with that, and there are a lot of Far Cry fans. So maybe they would be like, Ubisoft are doing exactly the right thing with Far Cry. We don't want anything to change with that, so we're annoyed about Vivendi. Whereas Assassin's Creed seems like people might be a little less happy with how that's gone recently. Again, if I've got a company, a publisher that makes a lot of games I like, and it gets, a majority share taken up with Vivendi, am I worried that, that quality is going to go down? Am I worried that they're going to start making free-to-play mobile? Is that the kind of thing I have to worry about here? I just don't know.
It's so difficult to know because the impact on fans, I think, is difficult. But I use Activision Blizzard as an example. It's clear that the existing entity that is Activision Blizzard really fundamentally understands what's good about Blizzard, for example. So that didn't affect that. And it just seems to be they've kind of, consolidated their strength. Their share price went up massively, through the last couple of years. So it's all about whether the controlling interests really understand what's fundamental to the company. If they do, then it can be completely fine. It can be almost totally transparent, I think, for fans on the end of the products, and sometimes it can be a good thing. It can shore up their financial future. If someone, acquires a company for a huge amount of money, in a certain set of circumstances, they will want to basically allow that company to continue doing what they're doing, but perhaps with more funding. In the worst case, obviously, they just close it and sell it off. So that's obviously a disaster for fans. So it's just difficult to know. It really depends on the internals of what happens, I think.
Yeah, I was kind of really interested to hear that that Canadian law has it that if you establish more than a 50% stake in a company, via buying their shares, something kicks in, which means that you have to offer the option of buying it outright from any minority shareholders. Yeah. Basically, it protects these minority shareholders in this way from suddenly being against a shareholder much more powerful than them, which is interesting. I mean, I don't understand stuff enough to really know what the implications of that, but it's interesting.
I think that's fairly universal. Yeah, it does seem to be a good kind of protective thing against a company's management basically being entirely derailed by just aggressive sort of takeover without you getting any compensation if you're a minority shareholder. Yeah, I mean we do tend to forget at our size and indie developers just kind of the crazy high finance world that goes on with these bigger companies. It's just really interesting to hear about all the stuff they do. And orchestrating these deals is an entire industry in itself of financiers and lawyers who all have to know the games industry and kind of work on them. So there's this whole meta industry that's involved around these big deals, these massive trades between these huge companies.
Yeah, well, we wish you well, Ubisoft, you little upstart.
Yeah. Keith Stewart wrote an article for Eurogamer recently about the history of player profiling, specifically categorizing players into discrete taxonomies, such as those who try and extract the maximum amount of value from a game versus those who value a rich experience. Is this kind of reductive approach worthwhile?
Well, I think that it probably is possible to divide gamers into basic types and work out in very broad terms where you're targeting your product. I think that's probably right. One of the reasons I wanted to bring this topic up, though, is because one of us got very upset on social media last week at people who don't buy games that aren't long enough.
Yes.
And it's an interesting paragraph in this, saying that they found that that there are just a large number of people who just feel good about having got good value out of a game. When I buy a game, I kind of forget about the value proposition once I bought it, and if I enjoy it, that's good. I certainly wouldn't be dividing the cost by the number of hours I was playing to get any kind of value proposition for me. On the other hand, it does remind me of a thing that humans do, so I kind of want to pay attention to it. I'm one of those people who would rather have 3 extremely high-quality hours than 50 boring ones.
Yes.
But then, the most important games in my life are games sort of Bridge Baron, Spelunky, Nuclear Throne might eventually get there, Tribes 2, where I have 500 plus hours spent on them. So those are the 2 things I want to see. So really good shorter experiences and things that I can play forever and ever. So yeah, what do you think about that?
I think it's good to really try and look at categorization as long as you're not too dogmatic about it. As long as you're saying, well, a long-term player can't be the same as a value player because they're different categories, And also, with all categorization, especially in psychological categorizing, it seems to be useful to say that it's a preference. It's expressed as a person's preference. It's like their default mode of being, and they can move and transition between different variants of modes. So with those caveats, I do like profiling. I think it can be very useful for developers, not least because it gives you a language with which you can talk about different types of players. You don't just say, oh, maybe there's somebody who might want to do this. You might say, maybe somebody is a whale or something. People don't like the term whale now, but there you go. Something like that is good. In terms of the length and value thing, the thing that particularly irritated me was people who believe that length is directly proportional to value. Someone I was sort of mildly arguing with said that they would, in every case, much prefer a bad game that was really long to a good game which was short and expensive. And to me, that's just irrational. I mean, that's taking a personality sort of preference and it's codifying it into a way that literally makes no sense.
Well, it's difficult. I guess you've got to make the division between what the value proposition is for the individual.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely true that sort of saying that about the game, sort of assigning that value to the game itself is ridiculous. But I can imagine that for that person that's actually true. I can imagine that he literally will just feel better and have got more value out of a 30-hour thing, that he was kind of felt all right for those 30 hours, but he also feels really good about the game because he got extra time about it rather than a 3-hour experience that was too short. So I can understand that as being a valid subjective thing, even though I think it is kind of it's not a viewpoint that I particularly empathise with. But I won't buy games that look a certain way. And when I say, I think what's really bad about criticism on Twitter and stuff is that people don't manage to separate the things out. Like, I'm not buying this because this thing is something I don't like from this is something that I think is wrong.
Well, so this was specifically about Superhot originally, and it came from Steam reviews, so people who had purchased the game and were then complaining about it after they'd finished it. And there's argument in that context where saying that the value of the game is exactly proportional to its length, to me, is not a valid subjective opinion. It just makes no sense. Because, of course, it's possible to imagine an experience that is so great and is short that is worth $20 or $30 or $60. It's possible to conceive that in the realm of human experience. And saying that that's literally impossible, to me, is irrational. It's nonsensical.
Yeah, but I think people just say things are literally impossible when they start having an argument. And that's kind of, I mean, that's not the interesting thing about what they start off saying. Like, that's just kind of a little minutiae point. Like, yeah, it's definitely true that you can imagine a particular case that breaks, most logic like that. Like, I could say I don't like any film that has some aspect in it, but then I bet you could concoct a film that had it that I liked. Right,
but the point of taking that position is to show that it's a scale. So if you can prove the existence of a scale by taking an extreme position at the other end and then working back from it. So when you're in discussion with someone and you make that point and they deny that point, then you can't have a reasonable conversation with them, because if that's necessarily true, you can't work back from that to them accepting the existence of a scale. They have to dogmatically refute that point in order to maintain their own position. And when someone does that, it means they're not recognizing the absurdity of what they're arguing. It's not just specifically, oh, you could disprove me in this extreme case. If they won't then accept that as an idea, it won't break them out of a monolithic approach to what they're trying to say.
Yeah, but are you sure you haven't closed your mind to their idea first by having to go there, like by trying to prove? I mean, you said you're trying to prove them wrong, right? Or basically prove that it's not okay to value Superhot on how long it is. Like, it sounds
exclusively, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of sounds like you've closed your mind to their point of view before they've closed their mind to yours. Like,
no, because my point of view encompasses theirs, because I'm arguing for a scale.
Sure.
And they're arguing for a singular point. So necessarily that's not true.
So what's the singular point? That games below a certain thing are sort of necessarily too short?
The most important thing about a game's value is its length.
Right, okay. I mean, I think...
And that's just false.
I completely agree. It's just that I think that, maybe the person probably wants to say, if they're not being an idiot online, a game's length is extremely important to me, and I'm being hyperbolic about it.
Right. That I would happily accept that, but the problem is that the reason is that this information gets back to developers solely in the form of your game is too short.
Yeah.
And the reason that I'm annoyed about is Superhot is not too short. Commercially, it's fine. So if they'd listened to that information, they might have ended up making a worse game that cost more to make. And it's just information that they need to not listen to. However, if that information is presented in the context of some players think that this game should be longer because I felt X at X point, not these games are too short, oh my god, it's a waste of money, then that's information that can contribute to a discussion, firstly, and secondly is useful to a developer.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just think that when they say this game is too short, I think what they're saying is, I am one of these people for whom length is very important.
Yeah.
So I think it would be better if people framed things like that. But of course, people get emotional when they have a thing that's important to them that isn't fulfilled, and then they say, like, this is an objective problem with the game, rather than this game doesn't fulfill my subjective criteria.
Right. And that's why I'm always going to argue and try to argue in such a way that you produce basically something that is useful as an opinion, rather than something that is absurd and just necessarily has to be discounted because of its absurdity.
Sure. I mean, I think that, like, I'm not sure sort of violently showing someone is wrong is the best way of getting that. Like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. If someone says, like, your game is too short, I guess, I don't know what the next thing I would say from that is. I mean, I agree that of course it's ridiculous. You could have the most amazing hour of your life, and then it would be fine. I'm just trying to work out, like,
it is right. It is difficult to be constructive when you're faced with an opinion that is so ludicrous. I'm happy to say that's a stupid opinion, because I think by the definition of stupidity that it harms yourself, other people, and the entire situation. It fulfills all those criteria for me. So I think it's valid to say it's a stupid opinion. But as you say, people get very emotional about it, and what they are actually saying is, I like to have longer experiences in a game, which of course is not a stupid opinion. So it's difficult to go past the way that it's being expressed when the way that it's being expressed is so bad.
Yeah, I guess what they mean is, I would really like this game if it was a long game.
Yeah.
Like, if, and that's why it's such an emotional issue, because it's like you're so close. If the developers had just prioritized this thing that you prioritize, then it could have been something that you really love.
Yeah.
Like, so I mean, you say it's a stupid opinion. I mean, I know what you mean, but I think it's kind of, it's such a, I just think it's like a universal or a semi-universal thing that you get upset in that situation, and you say things, and the output of what you say is stupid, but that's not really what you mean. It's not an opinion at the point that they're expressing it.
Yeah, and I think not saying what you mean is also criminally stupid.
Fair enough.
The other thing, I mean, it's interesting going back to this topic. Profiling can be really useful because, as you say, this is a kind of generic feeling that a lot of people have, that something is too short. And it is irrational. If you look at Superhot, there aren't many good ways that you could think of making it longer, especially keeping the kind of trajectory that they have. The amazingly nice level design progression that they have would be very hard to extend over a game that was twice the length. You know, it would get boring by that point.
Yeah, and I actually think that is like by far the more interesting point.
Yeah.
You know, like that is something that I think you can get people to connect with, because that's just definitely true. You know, especially for this game, like there are games that where you're just diluting it, and everyone has a different taste for what the best dilution is. Like you could make Far Cry, you can make a lot less diluted, and maybe I would prefer that. Or you can make it more diluted, other people prefer that, and that's just like on a scale of subjectivism. But you're right, it's like a massive decision to go like this with Superhot. It's worked out amazingly well, and if you just said, you know, yeah, this game would be worse, I definitely agree with that, and maybe some people would be able to change their minds with the understanding that there is a kind of game that just cannot be long.
Right, yeah, definitely. People, when they want something from a game, they don't tend to often understand that it requires trade-offs. And that's something that developers, I think, sometimes overemphasize. Like a developer will often think too much about how much work it is to do something. Tom Francis had that really good thing about player value from a feature versus work to implement, and how he thinks about that people quote a lot. You know, there's different ways of looking at that other than his way, but it's an important issue. Developers, I think, spend a lot of time thinking about that, whereas people who play games are like, it would be great if this thing had this, and that is a thing that needs to be decoded by a developer, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I always used to want Monkey Island 2 to be 10 times as big. Yeah. Like, I desperately wanted that because I loved this world and I wanted it to be bigger and I wanted it to be able to explore more in it. That would have been against an adventure game. That wouldn't have worked. Like, you can't just make an adventure game that big. It becomes far too big. Yeah. So, you know, it was something that I desperately wanted. I was 12, so I was convinced it would have been really, really good. But it wouldn't have been. So, yeah, decoding that feedback into the different bins of, this is from a player who will never like my game, so I have to discard this. Or, you know, this is someone who is feeling this way, but I could actually make him feel a different way in a different respect to the thing that he's directly commenting on. It's like one of the greatest skills.
Awesome. Just before the recent announcement of Pokemon Sun and Moon, Gamasutra polled their readers in order to determine the most influential elements of the game's design. Battle mechanics came first, closely followed by the trading feature. Would it be possible to make a Pokemon clone without it feeling too similar?
Well, it depends a little bit on how you approach it. Most Pokemon clones are, maybe that's a bit unfair, actually. Pokemon is a large-scale, grand, sort of JRPG-ish, with a pretty specific version of JRPG combat. The evolution and the trading's big deals. I mean, it's just got like everything going for it, really, in a macro sense. We all love Pokemon. It's still a bit too linear for my tastes, but like I like massively unlinear things, and the battles take too long, and for me they require juggling of too many things. So if I were to do a version of Pokemon, it would be quite drastically different. But the thing is that Pokemon is still so good that I don't know what the point of making a close clone of it is.
Right, yeah, and also a lot of Pokemon is about people's relationships with these characters that have existed for a long time now. So I don't know if someone can kind of come into this. It is sort of slightly surprising that there haven't been more indie-ish things. I mean, we've just seen Stardew Valley, which obviously is a Harvest Moon clone.
Yeah. Very
sort of affectionate Harvest Moon Animal Crossing clone that obviously is working extremely well. Number 1 on Steam, massive community already, big success for Chucklefish and their developer. So there are these things where it's kind of just enough to make a modern version of it. So although I've already said this thing about nostalgia and sort of brand and characterization and so on, I think someone could make a Pokemon game. You know, if someone made a Pokemon game that was sort of like Undertale, that was a bit ironically self-referential and sort of silly, had modern silly graphics, I could imagine that being an indie hit.
Yeah, I think that's a cool idea. I think one of the problems that you have is that I think Pokemon probably does rely on a lot of depth of like having a lot of these creatures, having a lot of these moves, and sort of all all of the core mechanics of Pokemon are a little complicated to implement. So it might take quite a long time to do that. But people probably would like that a lot. Yeah, like a sort of a subversive, slightly humorous, slightly offbeat Pokemon would be pretty funny. I mean, I think one of the problems is that Pokemon and games like it require you to really like the character design, or at least to have a lot of character design. So you need to have the art for 150 cool looking creatures and their weird moves and stuff, which I think is a daunting task for indies. Probably why it hasn't happened more.
Yeah, I mean, again, sort of that's why I think a really lo-fi kind of approach might be the only way someone could do it if they were going to do it from an indie point of view. But yes, you're right. It also requires a pretty deep, complex design of this combat system, and I don't think you could just copy the Pokemon one. It'd be interesting to see what happened if someone did that, if they just went through and sort of copied all the moves.
I mean, I'd really certainly sort of, if you were going to make a somewhat clone, I would definitely start off that way, because when you start trying to redo that from scratch, which is definitely what I would do if I was doing this, but when you try and do that, you spend so long doing that if you've got all of these mechanics to get down before you can even get to a point where you can start really iterating on it, it's just a very long process.
Yeah, no, I would genuinely be interested to see the commercial prospects of something which was a complete gameplay clone, but narrative and art sort of redo.
Maybe Chucklefish will do that next.
Maybe they will. A company from Portland are working on an indie games arcade cabinet. Apparently the device will be targeted at bars and cafes and will offer a selection of games via a subscription. Do you think this makes any sense on any level?
Well, I like this, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. The key idea to this, which I find really attractive, is that you would have this in bars somewhere, like in a town in Oregon, and it would actually be playing games by local people. So it would kind of be you're playing. It would be like an open mic night, but for video games every night. And I kind of like that. It's a romantic idea. But, the first problem you have with this is the controls. I see this prototype box, and it's got 4 Street Fighter-esque sort of fight sticks with some buttons, and that's cool, but that's only appropriate for an extremely small number of indie games. And you can't really put 4 mice and keyboards on these things. That's not really the controls people want to use in a pub setting. So it's a really nice idea. I'm just not convinced it can work.
Yeah, I don't think it's a commercial thing, really. I mean, I'd love them to prove me wrong. I mean, I'd like to go to a cafe or a bar and be able to play Towerfall or something, or I've forgotten that ridiculous game, one of those 4-player games that has all the bees and the big queen bee and stuff. I'd like to play that because that's really fun to play with a group of people, and it would actually work. It is frustrating to me that the thing you get stuck with is pub quiz machines as the only kind of form of corporate digital gaming when you're out with a group of people. And a lot of those games are extremely boring to play, and everyone gets bored of them. So it would be nice to play some arcade games. Maybe the pub quiz machines will start having joysticks on them.
That'd be cool. Or chuck a 360 into it. Yeah, I like it.
More on the ill-fated Shanghai Dota 2 major now. Gabe Newell issued a statement partway through the event clarifying some of the issues and also calling James Too Good Harding, quote, an ass. Valve 5 Vu. Apparently Valve have also fired the production company running the event. After the event finished, there were even more problems as the new production company cleared out the practice rooms without notifying the teams. Is this the most disastrous esports event ever?
It sounds pretty bad. I mean, you're better equipped than me to answer that question. But I imagine Valve are just hoping this whole thing goes away. Yeah. We've covered this quite a lot. I don't know what else new there is to say about this. But I hope it gets better.
Well, I think following on from last time, we talked a bit about what actually happened with Too Good, and I've watched the footage from the event now. And there has been quite an interesting range of responses to this. I really recommend Chris Thurston from PC Gamer. He wrote a very good article about it, and I was lucky enough to have a chat with him about that article at the weekend, which is very cool. And he was basically saying that there's a lot of stuff that happened which is sort of broadband unacceptable. So it doesn't have to be a choice between what he called sort of too good humor and professional sports broadcasting. He really kind of agreed with the point I was making, that is, I think esports has a unique position between those two things. So you don't have to be kind of quote unquote professional in the suits and ties sports broadcasting way, but you just can't have someone going around making, porn censorship jokes about disability, offensive jokes about members of a player's family, even if that player sort of thinks it's okay. There's just a level of content below which it's unacceptable. And I think for those reasons, stepping in and saying this guy's got to go now is pretty much fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of, I think, established different levels of professionalism, and sure, maybe esports has to find a new one in between two existing ones. I was listening to a very interesting Bill Simmons podcast yesterday that was just talking about the state of sports media, and he was on one of the NBA pre-game shows for a couple of years, and he was talking about his experience there at ESPN's one versus TNT's one, which has Charles Barkley on it, and apparently is the best thing ever, and everyone absolutely loves it. He was saying that ESPN have highly produced shows. Apparently, funnily enough, Pardon the Interruption, which is a show this show you're listening to right now is kind of based on, is actually pretty much the only ESPN major show that is not like massively scripted. Even these panel shows and these men sitting around a table shows, they have all the points that they want to hit, and they really try and keep a massive amount of control over them. So Bill Simmons was saying that this was pretty bad and just tended to be very stilted and shouty, whereas this TNT show was much more free to let professionals talk and sort of let the whole thing breathe a bit, and that produces with good enough people the right kind of content. So people are still trying to work this out everywhere. I mean, I agree. I think that the incredibly buttoned up level of professionalism is, I think it's probably fair to say that people in their teens, the kind of people who are much more interested in watching YouTube than ever watching TV, or Twitch rather than ever watching TV, they're probably just going to be against that, and we're going to go into a trough for that, because these things are really cyclical, I think it's fair to say. So we're going to have to see that coming up. So people are going to define the boundaries, but as you say, all the things you mentioned are pretty clearly beyond any sensible boundary for this.
Exactly, and the problem is that it is really hard to get people within esports to understand that distinction, because I think it's quite subtle. It's just, I think you're right. I think it might be to do with age, because there's a lot of jokes that teenagers will make that are really, really offensive, and nobody should ever endorse those jokes in any way. But when you become an adult, you kind of learn where some of the lines are about the jokes you can make which push people's buttons a little bit. And really good comedians, mainstream comedians, can find those lines. I mean, I was amazed by Chris Rock's Oscar speech, because he was able to take really offensive, inflammatory ideas, and because of his experience and his style, he was able to make them into jokes and sort of pushing the envelope type comments that didn't get him a massive negative response. I mean, he got some negative response, but given the material. And that's what I feel like esports kind of needs to learn with this stuff. It needs to learn these broadcasts have been around a bit longer. They need to learn how to push against existing boundaries in a way that's fun and entertaining and funny, but not just kind of completely ride all over them and say absolutely anything that comes into their heads. Yeah,
I mean, there's something sort of mildly funny about us sitting here trying to work out what the right level of professionalism for older teenagers is. I mean, the honest truth is that we don't know what will be socially acceptable in 10 years. There are things which stay the same, and then there are things that change. It's funny you bring up Chris Rock thing. I mean, I think he did a great job. The context for that couldn't have been much more sort of welcoming to almost anything he would do, because Hollywood was kind of, the way out for them was to be roasted for a short period of time. Right. And Chris Rock is also like, people appear to think that he's pretty much the best stand-up right now. And it's something that I was talking about over the weekend, actually, that it's not just the content of a joke or a quote. It's so much the context of who it is saying it. It's like
Absolutely.
Bieber can come on Twitter and say hi, and that means something to people. Like they're imagining him, this character, saying hi, and that's really funny or really something or other. They love that, and that just works. So that's a really roundabout way of saying I really hope that it's about the audience, right? If only 14-year-olds are watching your cast, then the level of sort of humour and professionalism you want there is going to be different than the hoped-for situation where teenagers, people in their 20s and people in their 30s are all watching. And there's a reason why stuff that's meant to be broad appeal is sort of, in inverted commas, professional. It's because the people who are older are the people who are in charge of whether or not the household is watching it together. Yeah. And the kids can always go and find something really subversive on their own time.
Yeah, that's all completely true. And this is the thing, when we've talked about controversial stuff on the show before, we both agree that it's so important contextually, the timing of how it's said, who is saying it. If you look at some of the content of those Chris Rock jokes, any other comedian at any other time might have lost their career over them. Honestly, it's with some of the language that he was using and some of the situations that he was talking about. And that to me was why it was such an incredible thing, because you were right, he managed to judge the timing and the situation such that he was able to say things on TV that I don't think I've ever seen a comedian say before and make jokes about before. And that's just part of his genius. And this stuff, you're right, you don't want the thing where it's kind of completely dominated by this older audience who are trying to make it palatable for everyone, and you don't want the thing where it's entirely about sort of breaking boundaries all the time. So these things need to be negotiated. I really hope that this bad incident and these bad tournaments don't set things back. I mean, a lot of what Too Good did, it was good as well. This thing with the whiteboard that people really like. He brought his own whiteboard and he kind of invented these stupid games about ranking different players on the whiteboard and tried to draw the panelists out into doing stuff with that, and then kind of made fun of that. And, just as a sort of hey, we can't afford graphics, so I've got this. That kind of thing is really great, and it plays into the sort of slightly kind of broom closet subversive nature of a weird esports.
Yeah, well, it sounds like he's got real talent and he's got something really going on. So the problem is that I think that he screwed it up, because this is not a good thing to happen for your brand. There are times where you can parlay this, and I think you were talking about it last week, that there are a lot of people who might be going after him now. Maybe he can parlay this into be a good thing, but this is one of the biggest stages. And I think what you'd want to do is try and show all of that good stuff without crossing that line.
The thing that's fascinating about him and why I've been so interested in his career is that he just can't do that. He's done this so many times, created a situation where he's being the funniest person in the room and then just goes way over the line and causes a huge problem and gets fired or causes a huge drama. And it's just so kind of, he doesn't have that ability to turn that off. And as somebody who tries to think really hard about not destroying situations that I'm in when I'm being funny or, trying to be interesting or whatever, I find that fascinating. I can't imagine how sort of disastrous it can be to not have that switch or that desire to have the switch at all.
Yeah, well, I'll try and watch this video and see what he's like, yeah.
Harmonix have launched a crowdfunding campaign on Fig in the hopes of creating a PC port of Rock Band 4. They estimate it will cost $2 million to create the port and are asking for $1.5 million. Wow. That's my question.
Yeah, here we go. Lots of things to look at here. I'm kind of glad that they're asking for a semi-realistic amount of money. I mean, I don't know if it's actually going to cost $2 million. It is only a port, but probably one of the things that upsets me most on Kickstarter or indeed Fig is people underselling how much it actually costs to do something. So I'm happy about that, basically. And it's also obviously a market testing thing. Now, my opinion would be that this market does not exist. And it's not doing particularly well so far. I don't think it's going to make this $1.5 million target. It's only got to 360,000 so far, and I think it's been going for about 7 days. Mm-hmm. And finally, I don't know how important this is. I think possibly very important. You get a copy of the game, obviously, but there's a big asterisk in that you still have to track down one of the console peripherals. You don't even get the full the full thing. Now, the journalist who was writing about this for RPS made the funny joke that you can get these pretty easily at any charity shop, which might be true, but this is still not really an ideal situation for buying something online.
This is a really weird one, and Fig is again a weird choice. I was talking to someone about Fig last week, a game developer, and he said, like, people don't know what this is yet, and we don't know if it's going to work, and we don't know if the Double Fine isn't a good case, because basically anything Double Fine do will get funded. So I find this very hard to take in. There's a lot of things. We talked a lot about Rock Band and Guitar Hero and stuff previously, so I don't feel like we need to kind of go back through that as an analysis of why it's popular. I think we've covered that. But this is like, it's odd. As you say, it's nice that they're asking for like a decently large amount of money that could plausibly, at least kind of make a big contribution to this thing. So that's good. It feels kind of honest. And I mean, maybe this just came about at the end of a pub argument where they were saying, like, we'll never get this money.
Yeah,
like,
honest is actually kind of the best word for this, because, someone said to them, no, you can't release this on the PC. It's not going to make any money. So they were like, well, fans are saying they want it. We'll just give it a go. And I think that the expected outcome is the expected outcome. I don't think it's going to make it. And again, I've said this many, many times. One of the best things about Kickstarter is deciding not to do something based on the results from Kickstarter. That's kind of, in some ways, in a very weird way, like the best thing that can come out of Kickstarter, because a lot of the things that succeed on Kickstarter would be succeeding if you weren't doing a Kickstarter, assuming you could afford to make them. But there's just one, that this route where you think something's a good idea, you go to a site like Kickstarter or Fig, and you find out people aren't interested in it, and at that point you decide not to do it, is actually pretty healthy. So, win. Yeah,
I like that idea, and I do like that idea with ports, because ports really have a big vocal minority problem in developer communities. It's just, anyone who wants it to be on that platform will shout about it. So you get a disproportionately high number of people in your community talking about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a sustainable audience in its own right. So that can be very difficult. So yeah, a really good developer response is to go, okay, hey, we'll put this out there, and then if people really want it, they'll pledge their money, and then we can see what the market is like. I really, really like that, and it's good. So from that point of view, this is good. But again, the Fig thing complicates it for me, because you're basically saying, hey, you get to invest in this idea as well as just kind of kickstarting it, as well as just buying it. So then you have to think about, like, am I going to get a return on my money? Or as you said last time, like, that's like a weird sort of exciting bonus thing that makes me feel like I feel better for putting the money in. So that's the thing I can't really pass.
Fig is way too complicated for me as a consumer. Like, I will not ever do anything on Fig, whereas I might kickstart something. Like, it's just... Yeah. It feels like I'm making a mistake if I use Fig. It's like I'm supposedly doing this thing that I might invest in. Maybe this was your point a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember. It feels like, am I kickstarting it or am I investing in it? If I'm investing in it, this is a bad idea. If I'm kickstarting it, it's a completely different set of feelings that I should have. It's just way too complicated for me.
Yeah, I mean, if I was going to do something on Fig, I would view it as an investment, because it is an investment. When you make investments, what you're not supposed to ever do is take into account the perks that you get from investment. Like, if you're a shareholder of Waitrose or something, you get money off your Waitrose. Like, that's not, you should never think about that. It shouldn't factor in. So with Fig, I feel like getting the product is the extra. It's like investing in a startup and they give you free hats for a year or something. That's how you should treat it, and I very much doubt people are treating it like that. But that would be my approach.
Well, I definitely don't want to invest in Rock Band 4 on the PC.
Right, Rock Band PC. No, I don't think I do either. That's enough of that. Do we have any Ian's Magic Corner for this week?
We have none this week. I apologise for that.
Well, that's fine. We need to develop that more fully. But we do have some things in the film and television lounge area, which we will discuss quite quickly. Better Call Saul Season 3? 2? 3?
3. 2.
2. We've both been watching that. I'm up to date now. We can say some general things about it without being too spoilerific, because I think some people are probably behind. So I said to you the other day I was expecting something dramatic to happen by episode 3, and it really has not. And they've gone for this very sort of low, slow burning thing at the start, but we don't really have the kind of enigmatic stuff from the previous season, the kind of weirdness.
Yeah,
of it.
I
So
think
I'm not
the
sure.
only thing is this episode probably foreshadowed possibly something dramatic happening, shall we say. So I don't think it's out of range that you could have just been an episode off with that. I mean, I'm really enjoying it. I really think it's a great show, but I do think they're slightly stuck because they can't go very fast because they probably
Yeah.
want to do 5 series of this, and this didn't bother me particularly, but a lot of people are very annoyed that the first episode of series 2 slightly rolls back sort of the character development he did at the very last minute of the end of the last series of being like, I'm never gonna let that happen again.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I really kind of wish they'd just go, you know what? This doesn't have to be the same timeline as Breaking Bad, and just be like, this is now a completely different thing, and we get to see it actually evolve, and we stop having to end up with Walter White at the end, and Saul not, going out with this nice girl. So, but having said all that, it's just great, and they have really good cinematography, really good slow burning scenes, and 2 amazing actors.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got so much going for it, and I don't mind the slow burning thing. I just find it a bit curious. I don't really like the Mike storyline either so far. I feel like it's sort of the less interesting sides of that character.
Yeah, I
that are
agree.
coming
I
out
also
in the
don't
storyline.
exactly know where his character's supposed to go, because his character appears to be exactly the same as it is in Breaking Bad. So he's basically got nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does have problems, and you're right. I'm not particularly interested in seeing him weighing the moral decision that he appears to have to weigh at the end of this episode.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I'll watch the whole series and see. It could definitely go in a couple of different directions here, and I think it could definitely be a little bit of a nothing series. So we'll see.
Right, a bit of House of Cards. Have you seen any House of Cards yet?
Yeah, I've watched the first 2 episodes.
That is exactly the same as me. So again, without being too spoilerific, I actually really, really liked this. I think they had the dramatic situation at the end of the last series with his wife leaving, and then what they've done now is they've just kind of put them into a battle of wits against each other, which is kind of simmering along quite nicely, and has the usual thing of one character kind of gets a victory at one point and the other sort of has to fight back. And that to me is a really nice backdrop to open up the new series.
Yeah, I really like it. I've always had the same problems with House of Cards. You spoke to it a little bit. It doesn't tend to really do anything different. Things don't really change. Which bothers me a little bit, just subjectively. But I love the cinematography, I love the acting, I love the production values. I really hate both of him and his wife. I just absolutely hate them. So this is much better for me than the previous series, just because at any one point, at least one of them is losing. And I probably hate her very slightly more than I hate him, and I'm sure he's going to win. So, one of the most hilarious things about this series is I'm pretty sure they kill one character a season. I'm pretty sure he is responsible for the death of exactly one person every single season. And that's kind of, I think, one of the interesting things to see about who does Stamper kill in season 4.
It's the opposite of Game of Thrones. It's only
only one.
And you have to figure it out. Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I agree with you. Yes, they're both. They've really solidified them as both these sort of titanic forces of evil. And the other characters really work off them. One of the great things about House of Cards is how well they've brought along the supporting characters. And I really think that there's going to be some interesting stuff going on this season with them, and it just really works. Like you say,
so
it
Nev
is
Campbell is the new character now. Now,
Yes.
so far she's just kind of like a pretty straightforward House of Cards strong woman character. So she's definitely going to have a sexual weird thing. To set her apart. It's going to turn out she likes eating crabs naked or something. Because there's got to be something new about her character.
That's right. She's really good, actually, acting wise. There's a nice scene where Doug ominously turns up and she has that tiny gun.
Exactly.
That she keeps in there. That's really nice.
It's Texas, there are guns.
Right, little character bits.
Yeah, let's
and
talk
things
about
that
the
they do
first
so well.
scene, because the first scene, this isn't a spoiler. It involves
Yeah.
one of the characters having to recite a pornographic tale so his cellmate can masturbate.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is a pretty strong opening. And I don't mean strong in the universally positive sense, just quite pretty bold opening.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that to me, and I made the point that the previous season had him urinating on his father's grave.
Yes, that's right.
At the start. So it just seems to me like another one of their calling cards is this sort of bodily functions in the first scene.
I will say, I think
yeah.
to talk about the broader TV, people are always talking about how, in order for a late night TV show to succeed, it has to have things that everyone watched on YouTube the next day. So Jimmy Fallon has to have a bit with someone, and it'd be really funny, and it was really amazing that he asked them to do this, and they actually did it, and everyone watched it on YouTube the next morning. And I think that is now carrying over to TV. There has to be a thing that happens that's ridiculous that everyone talks about. I call this the Homeland thing. And actually, the guys who made Homeland, they made 24 as well, and I think they had it even at 24 with Kim and the cougar that almost eats her. They're really good, and Jack Bauer and the Towel. They're really good at having like something in every episode that's just really dissonant and weird that everyone like wants to talk about as just like a thing that you just laugh about. And I think that's part of this. Like they've got to have like a couple of scenes which are just really sort of weird.
Right, well, it's the evolution of your traditional water cooler moment, isn't it? Like that's the modern version of that. Yeah, that scene. I mean, it's so interesting because it's such a great way of bringing that character back. You know, he's the writer, and he's disappeared, and he's not in the previous season at all. And then he's sort of surviving by being a kind of pornographic bard, inventing the tales of salacious sexual conquest so that his cellmate can get off. And that, like, as the ultimate degradation of a writer.
Exactly.
I was thinking is kind of quite good.
Well, and I'm afraid it's not even
good.
subtle enough to let you have that point, because the scene ends with the guy reaching the prisoner reaching climax and saying, "You're so good with words."
Yeah, that line did completely ruin the scene.
Yeah,
it's true. Like it's just you don't. Yeah. It was too obvious at that point. But yeah, interesting, and I'm glad that character's coming back. I think it's nice that there's sort of someone who's outside the kind of intrigue, who has to kind of fight as an outsider. In the previous season, that was Doug, and that's going to be this character this time. So yeah, a good setup, I think. Very very positive on that one.
yeah.
Right, quickly now, we shall rush through games that were released this week in 2006, thanks to Eurogamer and producer Jimmy. Not many this time. We have Drakengard 2 on the PS2. Now, that is a name that's intriguing enough for me to do a stealth Google. And it's an RPG, so it's not that interesting. We have Dungeons & Dragons Online Stormreach on the PC. We have FIFA Street 2 on the Xbox, PS2, GameCube, PC, DS, and PSP. Now, FIFA Street, I'm surprised even got anywhere, to be honest. It seemed like a very weird spin-off.
I think people actually kind of liked this. There's an NFL Street 2 as well. Oh, it was Street, rather, as well. It's just these kind of weird, like, oddball remixes of the sport. I think these are kind of low-level successful.
Sure. I played the Rocket League hockey mod.
I've seen a video of that. Is that fun?
No, it's like bad Rocket League. It's like exactly what you would expect a minor game mode to be like. It's sort of the puck isn't different enough from the ball to make it interesting, and you have sort of slippy, slidey ice on the floor, and the people who play in it tend to be really bad. So it was just a bad experience. So these weird spin-offs, man. Like I'm not sure I'm down with them. Rebel Raiders Operation Nighthawk, which if I was going to have children, I'd probably call my first child that. And that's on the PS2 and PC. That seems to be a flight sim. A very dramatic name for a flight sim. Tak 3, The Great Juju Challenge on the GameCube, GBA, and DS. I'm not familiar with the Tak series.
No, I don't think I am either.
I don't think you are. Lord of the Rings Battle for Middle-earth 2 on the PC. That's boring. We got the top 10 UK Steam games now. And at number 10, it's Grand Theft Auto 5. At number 9, it's Dark Souls Trademark 3 Deluxe Edition pre-order. At number 8, it's BlazBlue. I'm not going to say that word.
Chrono Phantasma Extend.
Chrono Phantasma Extend. I lied, I did say it. 10% off. Factorio. Exactly £15.
Jim is happy about this.
Producer Jim is good to see Factorio getting there. I was a bit concerned that such an interesting game in such a kind of predictably lucrative genre was going to get passed over. But no, these big systemic tweaking games still doing well. So it's a game you
people love that.
Superhot. Now at number 6 at 10% off. That's a bit of a fall for Superhot down the chart. But, I'm sure they don't care because it was number 1 for a while. We met the team at the PC Gamer Weekend and they were very, very nice. We had a great time
with them. If you're in the top 10 for a week, you're pretty great.
Counter-Strike Global Offensive at number 5. Grim Dawn number 4. 10% off. What is Grim Dawn? I can't remember. I remember the name.
Is it an action RPG? I think we looked it up last week.
Did we can never remember. Yeah, it is an action RPG. Crate Entertainment, apparently. Yeah. Far Cry Primal at number 3. Really weird looking game, Far Cry Primal, I have to say. This feels like it could be jumping the prehistoric Mega Shark a little bit with Far Cry, but people really like the idea, so there you go. Stardew Valley at number 2. We talked about that earlier.
I'm going to pick this up next time I have any time. I actually might play this with the arrival of my second child when I've got a lot of time that I'm not allowed to be drinking in. So I might give it a go then.
You can have a child strapped to you and farm cabbages on your PC. Tom Clancy's The Division, pre-order at number 1. It keeps bouncing up there. I feel like the buzz around this is so huge now that it's going to be a major success when it finally does come out. Right, that's it. We've been lax on collating your listener questions this time. I know that there are some pending that I didn't manage to collate, so sorry about that. I'll try and get them all in next time. I'll have a big listener questions session then. I'm Mode7Games on Twitter. If you want to follow me, he is Ian Hardingham, and we will see you next week. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening, and goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.